Committee of the Whole meeting. I'll start with the Land Acknowledgement, which I will be providing. Councillor Graham is back. I'd like to acknowledge that Shuwap Chip Chien Kuribi, or Canmore, is located within the Treaty 7 territory and the traditional home of the Stoney Nakoda, which is comprised of the three bands, the Good Stoney, Bear's Paw, and Chiniki, the Blackfoot, which is comprised of the Kainai, Piikani, and what's the one I'm missing one? Blanking. Siksika, thank you. And the Tsuut'ina First Nation, as well as the Zone 3 Métis. I acknowledge and keep in the front of my mind at all times that this is their traditional home, and I commit wholeheartedly to the work of reconciliation. Recently, I attended the Alberta Municipalities President's Summit on the Future of Municipal Government. And when I was at that event, we did a lot of work around intermunicipal collaboration frameworks, intermunicipal development plans. We were in Edmonton, and many of the events started with a land acknowledgement like this. And at one point, I was sitting next to a gentleman who raised the fact that sometimes our neighbors as municipalities are First Nations, and that we have no process or obligation to create a similar framework to work together as levels of governance for the people in our communities. And that really got me to thinking, and it also got me really to appreciate that someone actually noticed that and mentioned it. And I think that this really comes back to how we are in an era where we are doing these things that are called land acknowledgements. And we are trying to start out when we do work as elected officials to set our mind and remind ourselves of where we are, acknowledge the place that we're in, and turn our attention to these relationships that in the past have been ignored or silenced or not even considered. And so I think it's also been 2 years since this council, or not this council, but council, it was before the last election, passed a motion to work towards a memorandum of understanding with the Stoney Nakoda. And so I think that while there is no overarching directive from other levels of government for us to work with our Indigenous neighbors, it's really important that we do that. And I wanted to take this land acknowledgement time to just reflect on the fact that that's work that we as a community are doing. We need to wait until our neighbors are ready to come to the table to speak with us. And so with that understanding, and that patience to work together, I think that we have a good framework in the future. And I'll wrap up the land acknowledgement there. All right. Back, okay. Now I'm going to see if there is anything on the agenda that needs, do we add anything to the agenda? I wanted to have one typo. In the staff report, Citizen Perspective Draft Survey, it says day-to-day.
That's day-to-day.
Day-to-day. So just kind of before that comes back as minutes. That was the only change on the agenda, so I will put forward a motion to approve the agenda for our Committee of the Whole meeting. All those in favor? Opposed? Awesome. First up, we have the pleasure of hearing from Rachel Ludwig, Chief Executive Officer for Tourism Canmore Kananaskis, for an update from them. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
There we go.
Thank you for having me. Deputy Mayor and Council. It's always a pleasure to be here and have the chance to give you an update on what the industry is doing in Canmore and Kananaskis. Today I brought with me actually our staff as well as some of our board members because we are about to celebrate Tourism Week in Canada that's coming up next week. And the motto of this year's Tourism Week is Canada/Canmore, fueled by tourism. I started with this one very powerful image, and you see a lady wearing a Canmore Eagles jersey and is very happy about it. Our community is so intertwined with tourism that even the Canmore Eagles have a tourism product called How to Be a Canadian Hockey Player. This tourism product is highly successful. It's one of the highest rated experiences in Canmore. It is a Destination Canada signature experience, and it actually started a franchise in Ontario now. That's how successful it is. And why is it important to our residents in our town? It really allows the head coach of the Canmore Eagles to have a year-round employment. It also gets the town of Canmore revenue for ice time that the Canmore Eagles are renting in order to provide this program. So this is where the direct benefits from tourism, town of Canmore operations, and residents really benefit everyone. And these are very cold-hearted numbers, and you're all very familiar with them. But tourism in 2019 provided 4,560 jobs to the community. Visitors spent over $450 million in 2019 with our businesses. Like, wait, you have a wellness business called Float Canmore. You probably benefited from that. Jeff, the yoga lounge, you're welcoming visitors throughout the year, so you're benefiting from it. Jeff Hillstead, probably you are benefiting from it by providing roofing for tourism businesses or residents that are working within tourism. So we are really all benefiting from the tourists that come into destination. And what else does tourism do? We are a community of around 15,000 residents. Meanwhile, we have over 70 restaurants, we have 40 hotels, we have Elevation Place, we have the Rec Center, we have the Canmore Nordic Center. And that's typically what a community of our size wouldn't have. Like if you look at Strathmore or you visit Bonnyville or Brooks, like they don't have that vibrant community. And that's mostly because our visitors are contributing $445 million a year going into those businesses. And there was a public engagement on tourism during the pandemic in 2021. And what we've heard loud and clear as an industry is that our visitors want to attract, our community wants to attract visitors that really feel a connection with the community. And that's what we are very mindful of on our day-to-day marketing that we are giving out to the world. And so our target audience is called a curious adventurer. And that curious adventurer is really interested in connecting with the community, learning about what a destination has to offer and what it's all about. And we are not going out and asking people that might not be mindful of our community to come. We are asking specific people that jive with our community and that respect our community, our wildlife, and our culture while visiting. Sorry, I just lost. Oh, let's do this. And with this, while visitors are coming to Canmore, we have the power to transform lives. Like we know that from our research that visitors coming here are in awe with the nature, with the mountains, with the wildlife they are getting to experience. And that they take home. This is a piece of the puzzle on climate action and sustainability where visitors see firsthand why it is worth protecting what we have here, and they take that home and hopefully change their habits while they're back into their home countries and hometowns. And of course, we are working actively to protect our environment because the environment is what makes visitors want to come here, right? So it's important for us as an industry that we are keeping this pristine land as pristine as it can be, and to educate our visitors as well that that they need to protect what we have and how they protect our wildlife, human-wildlife interaction. Sometimes it's as easy as don't litter, take litter out. But we do that through the Peaks, Pledge to the Peaks, and obviously as an organization we are committed to a triple bottom line and to be a leader in sustainable tourism. And it's really exciting that we will this year actually embark on a destination-wide sustainability assessment that will give us at the end of the day a score comparing us with other destinations and then giving us a plan forward on how to become even better stewards of the land. And really, that's it. Thank you so much for your time. And I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Ms. Ludwig. Does anyone on council have questions? All right. There you go. I figured it out. Councillor Graham.
You're doing great over there, Deputy Mayor. Thank you very much for your presentation. I was wondering if you could delve more into the index from GDI, what that looks like. I'm really glad that we're getting a benchmark. I think for years we've talked about sustainable tourism, and there has never really been any numbers to really back that up, to say we're doing the right things. So I was wondering if you could shed a little bit more light on what that program will look like, and what we will get back from it, and what we can learn from it going forward.
Perfect, for sure. What we can learn for it, we don't know yet. We need to go through the process first. The program itself, it's called the GDS Index. It's an international program where destinations across the world, mainly currently Europe, are indexing themselves against each other just to see where we're at and how we can improve. The index itself consists of 67 questions that go from actually administratively greenhouse gas emissions for the town of Canmore to population density. Then on a destination organization level, it will look at our policies on what we have for traveling, for DEI, for lots of other topics like that. It looks at some of our businesses, what they are doing. And it's not just a questionnaire where it's all vanilla and I can say, oh yeah, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, I'm great. We actually have to provide supporting documents in order to prove that we are actually executing on what we are saying we're doing. And because it is a destination assessment, and a destination is not just our organization, it's the town, it's our industry, we are working closely with the town of Canmore actually to get all that done. It was fairly comprehensive. It will take about 40 hours to complete the survey. And then once we look at the survey, we can then see, okay, where can we improve as a destination organization, maybe as the town, maybe as our industry, and then we can build a plan forward from that.
Thank you. I saw that many of the number one and number two towns have been up there for 5 years consecutive. Is it our plan that we will do this 1 year and consecutive years afterwards, or?
I think we need to do it consecutively years afterwards, because otherwise we won't be able to see how we can improve, right? Our biggest struggle is always funding. Those kinds of programs are not cheap to fund, and we were happy to get grant funding from the federal government for this year. So, but the idea is that we'll do it in the future, and that will hopefully see our score improve. What we know from GDS is that typically the first year your score is not as great as you hope it will be, because if you don't measure something, you can't improve on it, right? So hopefully we'll see something along those lines in the future as well.
Thank you. If I may, one more. Speaking of funding, the town of Canmore does support you financially, correct?
Correct. About 10%, a little bit less than 10% of our funding comes from the town of Canmore through the Economic Development Business License Registry.
Excellent. And will we see a financial report this year from the town? Or from the-
We do we release the financials to our members, and also we typically do a high-level report to the AGM, and then there will be a report coming on how, like, to the contract, right? We have a contract with the town of Canmore. The sustainability index is part of that. We also commit to, within the contract, to do in marketing a certain way, and then to the pledge to the peaks to educate our visitors on sustainable travel behaviors.
Wonderful. And then last one.
Councillor Mera.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Ludwig, for your report, and my question was answered at the beginning of her. Well, thanks, so we're good.
Right. Councillor McCallum.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation, Ms. Ludwig, and for bringing all your backup team here. Hoping there'll be some
I couldn't do it without them, so
singing
they're
and dancing
really
later on,
important.
perhaps. I really appreciate you coming to see us today. And you touched on the public engagement work that you and your team did in 2021, which I know was really hard work, and I haven't had a chance to say thank you for that, but thank you for doing that on behalf of the community. You touched on the Pledge to the Peaks, which I believe came out of that in public engagement work, and then I read in your report Peaks Academy that you are launching this month, which is
Right.
exciting. It's exciting to have that consistency amongst all of the properties and tourism providers. What other initiatives have fallen or are in your line of sight out of that engagement that you're looking forward to in the next couple of years?
I think those are the two big ones. I mean, you see all my staff here. We have a staff of 5, so there's so much we can take on. So the sustainability index is really important work for us because our strategic plan calls for us to be a leader in sustainable tourism, and if we don't know where we're at, we can't execute on that. And that will take a big chunk of staff time to get that going. And from there, we then will have the sustainability strategy that then will allow us to inform a plan on going forward. And the Pledge to the Peaks, we're continually improving and executing on. So on the sustainability front, I think those are two very big initiatives that I'm proud we can put forward.
And what kind of uptake are you getting from your tourism providers on the Peaks Academy modules?
So far, we have beta testing done, and it was really successful, and we got the feedback that it's really comprehensive and useful. And then how much uptake we get, we need to see as we approach the summer.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for coming today, and I wish you all a really great tourism summer.
Thank you.
Councillor Graham.
Thank you. Yeah, just one minor follow-up. How many people have subscribed to the Pledge to the Peaks?
I would need to look that up. I don't know that off the top of my head, unfortunately. Yeah.
Roughly? Okay, thanks.
Councillor Ma.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Ms. Ludwig, thank you for your presentation. One of the things I liked when I was reading through here about the curious adventurer and how we want people to come, enjoy the Bow Valley, but leave in such a way that they're inspired to transform the way they live in the world. How do you guys, is there any sort of initiatives where you follow up with like visitors that have come here to see the impact of this sort of like initiative?
So, awesome question. I would love to do that. I don't think we have the resources or the funding to do that. During our brand engagement, and I was here last year to talk about our new brand, and the transformational piece is very important to that, right? And what we've learned through that is this untouched wilderness is actually why visitors come here and why they cherish the community so much. But doing a follow-up research on how they bring that to their communities, I don't know. It's an interesting question I should look into.
Yeah, you know, sometimes I've gone places I'm quite inspired by them to see what they're like. If I may ask more question, Deputy Mayor, with regards to the index, do we also get like a score as well, or is it just sort of you rank number 70 But is that a score?
No, we'll
to-
get a score.
Okay, so
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, there will be a hard number attached to it.
Okay, great. Because sometimes, you know, there's
to
these
that.
things where like, everyone's going up in score, and like, okay, like our score is going up too, but maybe we're still ranked at a certain point. But I just
Right,
want to make sure we
yeah.
can still improve.
Yeah, and some scores might go down, right?
Okay.
Like that happened actually with this year's results from this index, that some destinations actually saw their score go down.
Okay,
So, yeah, it's a really tough index to be good at.
Right.
And
Well,
that's why we chose it.
well, thank you, Deb. 'Cause if you can't measure something, you can't improve it, so that's great.
Exactly.
Oh, sorry.
I hit it. There we go. I'm in charge of the mics. In January, I attended with you a conference on regenerative tourism in Victoria. And one of the concepts that stuck out in terms of regenerative tourism to me is focusing some attention on the community experience of tourism, not just the visitor experience. How would this sustainability index measure that area or seek to address any issues that arise?
Great question. I don't think the sustainability index looks at that in detail, but we do measure resident sentiment within the Rockies community. So it's not specifically Canmore. However, the Canmore response rate is typically much higher than in Banff and Jasper. So while we measured first in partnership with Travel Alberta about a year ago, and resident sentiment rates were really low, and that was a bit disheartening and shocking to see. It has since improved quite a bit, but we are working on this very considerate as an organization. We have resident sentiment in mind. That's why we are marketing to the curious adventurer. That's why we are currently working with the events team at the town of Canmore to see if we can help sponsor the Canada Day Parade, to see if we can help with the Indigenous Peoples Day, to help with the Folk Fest, to really look at what residents are passionate about and then help give back to the community that way.
That's amazing. I think it's really important, especially when we consider the welfare of the community. And while tourism brings in a lot of jobs and money, it can also affect residents' experience of their own community.
For sure.
Long weekends in the summer, that kind of thing. So I think it's really great that it's on your radar and you're measuring and addressing. I had one last question. Is there anything that we as council could be doing in terms of advocacy at other levels of government to help support the tourism industry?
That is an excellent question. I think an all-of-government approach to tourism is always the way to go, because tourism affects so many pieces of the community and within the province and the federal government. There's many things that we've seen currently the provincial government improving on Crown and access. We see enhanced funding to Travel Alberta. We see some traction with tourism community status. The one single issue that would help us as a destination organization most, I keep bringing up sustainable funding and the size of my team, to have a legal framework that we operate in. And that would help us probably have more buy-in from the tourism community, would help us immensely.
Could you maybe expand a little bit? Like, what do you mean by a legal framework that you would operate within?
So we are currently funded mostly by our hotel partners that charge a 2% destination marketing fee to their guests. We also have 12 activity providers now that do the same thing. Legally, it's a bit of a gray area. There is a private contract between the hotels and our organization, but it can be abused as well. We
Yeah.
can have another discussion maybe behind.
I know that sometimes that
coffee.
kind of relates to financials and the kind of transparency that I think my colleague, Councillor Graham, was looking for, because there are some third-party private information points that aren't for sharing. So,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's actually a great feedback, and I will talk to you later about that.
Perfect.
Thank you. Any follow-ups? Awesome. Thank you, Ms. Lidway.
Thank you.
All right, so next up is going to be approval of the minutes of the March 21st, 2023 Committee of the Whole meeting. Are there any changes to the minutes? They look good. I'll put forward a motion to approve the minutes of the March 21st, 2023 Committee of the Whole meeting. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried? I'll do some banter while everything changes. I'm very excited for D1, under staff reports, the 2023 Citizen Perspective Draft Survey, verbal report from Ms. Robin Denage. Let me turn, oh, there we go, I did it.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I'm Robin Denage, the Manager of Communications, and this is the 5th time that we've worked with Ipsos to conduct a random telephone survey to assess citizens' attitudes and opinions about the town of Canmore and to understand the day-to-day experiences of local citizens. So the last survey we did was 2 years ago, and that was in the spring of 2021. So this year, I worked with Ipsos again to update our 2021 questions, and after a review by council, the GMs and CAO, we tweaked or removed a few questions. So we wanted to keep the survey to approximately 22 minutes. And then with our growing population, Ipsos recommended last time that we also increase the sample size from 300 people to 400 people to improve accuracy. And the final survey was ready to launch on February 1st, ran until February 14th. And so right now, I'd like to introduce Catherine Knaus, who will review the methodology and all of the survey results with you. And the results, I just want to point out, will be available on our website shortly after this meeting, and I'll include a link in today's council clips. But for those interested, it's at canmore.ca/survey. And I'll turn it over to Catherine.
Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, okay, great. Okay, so I'm going to start sharing my screen for the presentation. At that point, I won't be able to see you, so if you need to get my attention, best speak up. Okay, so can everyone see the presentation? Okay.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you very much for the introduction. As you mentioned, my name is Catherine Knaus. I'm part of Ipsos's public affairs team. My main focus is on municipal government research, so I work with lots of different municipalities in Western Canada. Very happy to be here to present the results of the town's 2023 Citizen Perspective Survey. There is a lot to get through today. The presentation will probably take around 45 minutes, and I am sharing my screen, so I'm not going to be able to see so much if you have a question. So just ask if you can hold any questions or comments until the end, and I will save room for them kind of once the presentation has wrapped up. The main purpose of the survey is to understand and assess citizens' attitudes and opinions toward the town and understand the day-to-day experiences of local citizens. The survey is repeated on a regular basis to understand how attitudes and priorities are changing, identify any new or emerging issues, and monitor perceptions of the town's performance. Prior to this survey, the last survey was conducted in March 2021. And just to refresh your memories as to kind of what was happening in the world at that time, it was very much in the midst of COVID, but kind of at a time when vaccinations were being more widely rolled out, and as a result, masks were starting to come off, businesses were opening up a little bit more, restrictions were loosening. So it was in the middle of pandemic, but a bit of a more kind of upbeat time of the pandemic before some of the more serious waves of the COVID hit. So I just think that's important to keep in mind when we're reviewing the results and looking at some of those year-over-year changes, kind of what the situation was back in 2021 when the last survey was conducted. The survey itself was conducted using a similar methodology to past surveys. It was a telephone survey conducted with a randomly selected representative sample of adult Canmore residents. The sample size this year was 400, which, as Robin mentioned, is an increase from past surveys, which were done with 300 residents. That bumped up to 400 this year to provide a better margin of error of the overall results. Interviewing was conducted on both cell phones and landlines, and all residents had to confirm that they were Canmore residents before proceeding with the survey. Interviewing was conducted in February 1st to 14th. The final data was weighted by gender and age to make sure the characteristics of the sample matched that of the actual population in Canmore according to the most recent census data, so the 2021 census. And overall results based on the sample size of 400 have a margin of error plus or minus 4.9%, 19 times out of 20. And that is, again, the overall margin of error based on that sample size of 400. If we're doing any kind of subsample analysis for, if, for example, a question was asked to only a certain segment of residents, the margin of error for those ones will be larger just because the sample size is smaller. The one other thing I'll just briefly touch on before diving into the results is as we go through, you'll hear me occasionally make reference to Ipsos municipal norms or kind of how the results compare to the normative score. Those norms are based on research Ipsos has conducted in other Canadian municipalities within the past 5 years. We like to include them because we find they provide some additional insight and context against which to evaluate your results. So as we go through, if I reference the norms, that is what I'm referring to. So diving right into things, the first one we'll look at is important local issues. What do residents feel are the most important issues facing the community? This is an open-ended question, so residents aren't prompted in their responses. They're free to say whatever is on their mind, and then we code them into these broad thematic nets to give a sense of the overall importance of each issue. There's a few things to point out here. First, the issue agenda is evolving. So what we're seeing as important issues this year is different from what we've seen in past surveys. The number one issue this year is social, mentioned by 47% of residents overall. What's included in that social bucket? It's almost entirely driven by concerns related to housing, particularly affordable housing. So 34% of residents mention affordable housing as an important issue facing the community, as well as unspecified housing mentions and availability of housing. That's really what is comprising that social issues bucket. It is up significantly from 2021. It was 18% in 2021, 47% this year, so that's an increase of 29 percentage points. It's a big jump. It is more comparable to what we saw in 2017, but still it's even up from then as well. This isn't unique to Canmore. I don't have a normative score for this one. The categories used here are a little bit different from what we typically use. Having said that, housing comes up in almost every survey that we do this year as one of the top issues in communities. In second place is growth and development, mentioned by 26% of respondents this year. There's no single thing that stands out from the rest. The top three growth-related mentions are the Three Sisters development, mentioned by 6% of residents, unspecified development mentions, mentioned by 5%, and another 5% say too much growth and development. This was the number one issue in 2021 by a large margin. 62% of residents identified it as a top issue there. So while it's still important this year, in second place, mentions around growth and development have dropped significantly compared to what we saw the last time the survey was conducted. Transportation is in third place, mentioned by 21% of respondents. The main mentions here are around parking, traffic congestion, and public transit. Very comparable to what we saw in 2021. Mentions did jump between 2017, 2021, and that's been maintained again this year. The economy sits just outside the top three in fourth place with 15% of mentions. The main mention here is cost of living. So almost everything in this economy bucket is related to the cost of living. Mentions are up significantly from 2021. They've gone up 10 percentage points. Again, this is another one where we're seeing come up more and more in the research that we're doing, both kind of on a local and a national level. Affordability issues are a challenge for people everywhere. In fifth place is a bucket we've called miscellaneous. This really includes items that don't fall into any of these other individual buckets, but still are enough to warrant a specific code. I don't really usually spend that much time talking about what's in here, but I did think it was interesting that the top two mentions in this miscellaneous bucket relate to the town's finances. So around kind of budget control and appropriate spending of taxes was 5%, and mentions of taxes or taxes being too high was mentioned by 4% of residents. The only other thing I want to point out on this slide is around wildlife management. In 2017, that was the third most important issue overall, mentioned by 23% of residents, and that's been steadily declining each survey. So it was down to 13% in 2021, and then it barely registers at 3% this year. The next thing we'll look at is quality of life, starting with overall perceptions of quality of life. This is a good 30,000-foot look at how residents view life in the community. Overall perceptions of quality of life are positive. We have 93% of residents rating the quality of life as very good or good this year. That said, they are down slightly from past surveys when 98%, so virtually everyone, rated the quality of life in Canmore positively. So we have seen that slip slightly compared to past surveys. What we're also seeing is a softening in impressions as well. So if you look at the percentage rating the quality of life as very good, that's 49% this year compared to 64% in 2021 and 70% in 2017. So that has been gradually trending downwards as well. Instead, it's shifting to more of a good feeling as compared to a very good. So not only has there been a shift kind of overall, but also in a weakening or softening of perceptions. That said, overall perceptions of quality of life are still on par with the norm. The norm is 93% good overall, so identical to what we're seeing in Canmore as well. Anecdotally, I can say that normative score has been trending downward a little bit over the past few years as well. Keep in mind it's based on past 5 years of normative score. If we were to look at the past 2 to 3 years, it would be shifting down a little bit as well. We also asked residents how they feel the quality of life had changed over the past 3 years. And here, as you can see, there is a sense that the quality of life is worsening. Over half of residents this year, 52%, say the quality of life has worsened. That's up from 38% in 2021 and 26% in 2017. So we did see a bit of a shift towards this kind of during the pandemic, and it's felt even more strongly now as we're coming out of the pandemic. In comparison, 8% of residents this year feel the quality of life has improved, and 39% say the quality of life has worsened. So taken as a whole, you can see that residents do feel there is kind of negative momentum to the direction that quality of life is taking, and things are heading in kind of the wrong direction. The norm also has a negative net momentum score. So again, that feeling of a worsening quality of life isn't unique to Canmore. We're seeing it more and more in a lot of the surveys that we do these days. The normative score is 17% improved, 48% stayed the same, and 38% worsened. So it is felt a little bit more strongly in Canmore, but that overall net feeling of things worsening instead of improving is consistent with what we're seeing in other communities these days. We asked a follow-up question. This is an open-ended question. So among those who feel the quality of life has worsened, we asked them, why did they feel that way? The top two mentions are the cost of living, mentioned by 36%, and growth and development, mentioned by 26% of residents. Mentions of the cost of living are up from 2021, so it was 14% the last time the survey was done. We're seeing a big jump in that this year, which is no surprise with the increase in inflation and interest rates. Cost of living is an issue for more and more people these days. Growth and development, while it still figures prominently, is down from a high of 51% in 2021. So that was the number one reason why residents felt the quality of life had worsened the last time the survey was conducted. Still plays a role this time, but not nearly as much of a degree as what we saw last time. Housing affordability and availability is in third, mentioned by 10%. And then 8% of those who feel the quality of life has worsened mention governance and leadership, and that is up from 2% in 2021. To give you a little bit of insight as to what that includes, verbatim comments make reference to city staff and council are not listening to residents. They don't feel there's been enough public consultation or engagement. might disagree with some of the decisions or the priorities, or the feeling that some of the decisions are being influenced by special interests and not in the best interests of all residents. So that's a small percentage. Keep in mind, it's of those who feel the quality of life is worsening, but it is up from previous years. That's actually a good tie-in to the next one, which is perceptions of staff and council. So looking at residents as a whole, how do residents perceive the performance of staff and council? And overall, the results are positive. Most residents feel satisfied with the performance of municipal government, including council and administration as a whole. 64% say they're satisfied. 66% say they're satisfied with administration excluding council, and 66% are satisfied with council excluding administration. So around 2/3 of residents are satisfied with how the town's going about running the community. This year's results are down from 2021, however, so particularly for municipal government as a whole and administration excluding council, those ones have dropped. The council excluding administration is also down a little bit, but that is not a statistically significant difference. Overall, these results are a little bit lower than the norm as well. So the norm tends to be more comparable with what we saw in 2021, so the drops this year kind of make this year's results a little bit lower than what we typically see as well. So satisfied overall, but a little bit lower than they've been in the past. Moving on to perceptions of town services. The first thing we'll look at is overall satisfaction with town programs and services. 86% of residents say they're either very or somewhat satisfied with the overall level and quality of services and programs provided by the town. This is comparable to 2021 at 88%. It is down from 2017, though, when 94% of residents said they were satisfied. So we did see this drop during the pandemic. We saw this in a lot of communities that we surveyed in when services were impacted by the pandemic. Some services weren't being offered, or kind of how they were offered was impacted as well. So it wasn't unusual to see some of those scores drop down during that time, and hasn't quite yet recovered to what we're seeing from pre-pandemic levels. Still on par with the norm, however, the norm is 88%, so very similar to what we're typically seeing in other communities this year, with the 86% satisfied here. We also looked at the importance and satisfaction of 18 different services. These were chosen in consultation with town staff. This is divided into 2 slides. I can't show it all on one slide. There's just too many services. But overall, all of the evaluated services are important to citizens. Of the 18 evaluated services, 16 receive an overall importance score. That's that combined very/somewhat important, higher than 80%. It really speaks to how much citizens value the services that the town provides. Moreover, 13 receive an overall importance score higher than 90%, and the overall highest scores go to fire and rescue services and parks, trails, and other green space, with 99% of residents saying these are important. At the other end of the scale, the services that are rated relatively less important are pedestrian-only Main Street, with 70% of residents saying this is important, and public art program with 67% saying this is important. So certainly lower than we're seeing for some of the other services, but still important to at least 2/3 of residents. As to how these compare to 2021, mostly stable, but there are a few changes I will point out. The overall importance of community events and pedestrian-only Main Street has decreased from 2021, but more emphasis is put on social supports, including family and community support and affordable services. So that's 94% important this year, up from 84% in 2021. And I think that makes sense and is consistent with what we're seeing in the survey, with affordability being a challenge for more residents this year. It makes sense that services that help support residents in this regard are now more important. Compared to the norm, a lot of similarities with what we typically see. 2 services that are rated more important in Canmore are land use and community planning and recreation facilities and programs. So both of those are rated a little bit higher in Canmore than we typically see. When it comes to satisfaction with these services and programs, of the 18 services, 14 receive a satisfaction score higher than 70%, and the overall highest score goes to recycling, garbage, and compost collection, with 93% of residents saying they are satisfied in this regard, including 60% saying very satisfied. Other highly satisfactory services would be fire and rescue services, community events, free local transit, water and wastewater services, and parks, trails, and other green spaces. These are all rated satisfactory by at least 9 in 10 residents. At the other end, the 4 services that receive lower scores are street cleaning, including snow and ice removal. 57% of residents say they're satisfied in that regard this year. That is down from 73% in 2021. Land use and community planning, 56% of residents say they're satisfied. So while it's relatively lower compared to what we're seeing for other services, it is an improvement from 2021 when only 44% of residents said they were satisfied. And the 2 services that are rated lower overall this year with less than half of residents saying they're satisfied are vital homes, 46%, down from 56% in 2021, and traffic management with 42% of residents saying they're satisfied in that regard, up a little bit from the 39% in 2021, but still lower than what we saw in 2017. A few differences from the norms. The biggest differences would be for street cleaning, land use and community planning, and traffic management. All of these are rated less satisfactory in Canmore than we typically see. So typically see a little bit higher scores for those ones than we're seeing here. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about this chart. I realize it's not the prettiest thing to look at, but it does provide some valuable information. It is a plot of importance and satisfaction for each service to give a sense for kind of what are the town's strengths and where are the opportunities for improvement. Divided into 4 quadrants based on the average importance and average satisfaction rating for the services. It's a relative type of analysis, so there's always going to be areas of strengths and areas for improvement, just to keep in mind as we're kind of going through things. So the primary strengths are in the top right corner, and these are services that are rated both relatively high in importance and satisfaction. Certainly want to maintain the high levels of satisfaction with these key services. These would be fire and rescue services, recycling, garbage and compost collection, water and wastewater services, parks, trails, and other green space, emergency preparedness, police services, and recreation facilities and programs. In the bottom right are what we call secondary strengths. So these are also rated relatively high in satisfaction, but lower in importance. They include community events, free local transit, and the public art program. To the left are what we've called opportunities for improvement, and the most important for these are the primary opportunities. So these are rated higher in importance, but relatively lower in satisfaction. There's 5 services here this year. They are social supports, maintenance and upgrading of streets and sidewalks, land use and community planning, street cleaning, including snow and ice removal, and traffic management. And then in the lower left are the ones that are rated both lower in importance and satisfaction. Those would be animal control and bylaw services, pedestrian only Main Street. So depending on available resources and priorities, may or may not make a targeted effort to improve performance in these particular areas. They could also be kind of more long-term action items once other areas have been addressed. And the only one I haven't mentioned is vital homes, which is also an area for improvement, but sits on the border of being kind of a primary versus secondary opportunity for improvement. The next thing we'll look at is financial planning. We have a question around value for taxes. 72% of residents rate their value for taxes positively this year, so very good value or fairly good value. That is down from previous years when we had 84% and 83% of residents rating the value for taxes positively, so it has dropped around 12 percentage points. We have around a quarter this year, 26% saying they receive poor value for their taxes, so that is up from previous years as well. This is one also where we're seeing a bit lower than the norm as well. So the norm is 79% good value compared to the 72% good value we're seeing in Canmore this year. This was followed by an open-ended question around what services would residents like to see the town spend more on to receive an increase in service. The top 3 mentions are parks, recreation and culture, 24%, housing, 24%, and snow removal, 19%. Parks, recreation and culture was also the #1 mention in 2021, so that was a priority then, it's a priority now. The emphasis placed on housing has increased, which is consistent with what we're seeing elsewhere in the survey, this being more of an issue for residents this year as it was compared to previous years. And then snow removal, this was one service where we saw a drop in satisfaction this year as compared to previous years. So I think it does make sense that we're seeing residents asking for an increase in service in this area as well. The next section was around communications, engagement, and customer service. Overall, 76% of residents rate the town's communications as very good or good. This is comparable to 2021, down a little from 2017, where 88% of residents rated the communications positively. But still good overall. Have a quarter, 24% saying the communications are poor or very poor. So there's a little bit of opportunity for improvement there, but overall this year's scores are positive and higher than what we typically see. So the norm for this is only 71%. So doing a little bit better than average when it comes to communications. Asked an open-ended question around information needs. So what types of information are residents most interested in receiving from the town? Community planning, land use, new developments is the #1 mention, identified by 22% of residents. That was the main mention in 2021 as well. Other areas residents would like to be kept informed are roads, transportation and transit, 10%, emergency services, 9%, and then a whole variety of other communication information needs. So residents really are interested in being kept in the loop on a number of different areas. In terms of how residents would like to receive communications from the town, there's no one size fits all. There's not one thing that really stands out above all others. The top 3 preferences would be email at 39%, newspaper at 33%, and social media at 31%. This is different from 2021, where the #1 mention was the newspaper. Mentions of the newspaper have actually been trending down over the past few years. So in 2017, #1 mention at 57%, that's down to 43% this year and down to 33% this year. Some similarities and differences to the norm here as well. So the norm, email tops the list of the norm as well. That is the most common way for residents to say they want to receive information from municipalities these days. However, mentions of social media are higher in Canmore than we typically see, while mentions of the mail are lower in Canmore. I believe in the norm, the mail is the #2 way of wanting to receive information, and that's 5th on the list here. Couple questions around the town's website. 81% of residents say they have been to the town's website in the last 12 months, which is quite a bit higher than we typically see. The norm for this is only 59%. So for whatever reason, Canmore residents are more likely to go on to the town's website. Among those who have visited the website, 88% say they find the content of information and online services useful, very comparable to previous years and also consistent with the norm. Attitudes towards engagement opportunities haven't significantly changed from previous surveys. Most residents, 84%, agree that they would like to provide input to the town for the purpose of influencing decision-making about town projects and services, and 1/3 say this is something they strongly agree with. Fewer, 62%, say residents have enough opportunities to provide input into decision-making about town's project and services. So majority of residents do feel that is the case, but if you look at how many are interested in providing input, there's a bit of a gap there. Where we're seeing lower scores is about what happens post-engagement. So 55% of residents say the town uses input from residents in decision-making about town's projects and services. And 48% agree the town's decision-making about projects and services is reflective of the voice of a majority of citizens. So whether that's true or not, I can't say, but that is the perception in the community that town's input isn't always, or residents' input isn't always been taken into consideration or reflected in the decisions that the town is making. These scores are fairly typical with what we see in other communities. Ones that's rated a little bit lower is around the town uses input from residents. So the norm for that one is 63% or 55% here. So it's a little bit lower than what we typically see. When it comes to customer service, delivery, and transparency, perceptions are positive. 87% of residents agree. Town staff are courteous, helpful, and knowledgeable, including 45% saying strongly agree. 3/4 agree the town practices open and accessible government, and the quality of service from the town is consistently high. Where we're seeing relatively lower ratings, both kind of overall as well as compared to 2021, is around accessibility and responsiveness. So this year, 68% of residents agree town staff are easy to get a hold of when I need them. That's down from 76% in 2021, as well as responding quickly to requests and concerns. 65% agree, down from 74% in 2021. Both of these are also a little bit lower than what we typically see. So the norms are 76% and 71% respectively, a little bit lower in Canmore. Environmental sustainability, this is a bright spot in the survey. 74% of residents this year agree the town is doing a good job addressing the issue of human-wildlife interaction in the town. That's up 8 points from 2021. So certainly made some inroads there. The percentage saying that this is very good has also increased significantly. We see a similar increase in perceptions around satisfaction with programs and services aimed at reducing climate change. This year, 75% of residents say they're satisfied, up 8 points from 2021. Again, an increase in the percentage saying they're very satisfied with this as well. One question around community safety. Nearly all residents, 99%, agree Canmore is a safe community, including 2/3 saying it's very safe. This is consistent with what we've seen in previous years. And we don't see a lot of crime and public safety concerns come up anywhere in the survey. If it is an issue, we typically see it come up kind of when we ask residents to identify local issues or reasons why quality of life is worsened or satisfaction with kind of safety related services. We're not seeing any of that in this survey, so I do think it speaks to kind of how safe residents feel here. And this is another one where the town is doing better than average. The norm for this is 89%. So certainly residents feel quite a bit safer in Canmore than we typically see. When we ask residents to identify the biggest crime and personal safety issues on an open-ended basis, theft burglary is the number one, mentioned by 46% of residents. All other crime-related issues are mentioned much less often. And this is very similar to what we saw in 2017. We know growth and development is an important issue for residents, so we did ask a series of questions around attitudes towards growth and development. Most residents, 60%, agree the town keeps citizens informed about how it plans to deal with growth. This is up a little bit from 2021, but not a statistically significant change. Opinions are mixed around, is it possible for the town of Canmore to grow while maintaining the quality of life we've come to enjoy in this town? We have 53% of residents agreeing with that, compared to 49% in 2021. Attitudes towards the town's growth management have improved. They're still relatively low, but they're certainly an improvement from 2021. So this year we have 45% of residents agree the town is managing growth and development in the Three Sisters area in a responsible manner. That's up from 31% in 2021. And another 45% agree the town does a good job managing the level of development and growth in the town. That's up from 35% in 2021. The last question was around diversity and inclusion. Attitudes here remain strong. We have 93% saying they feel a sense of belonging in their own neighborhood, including 68% saying strongly agree. 91% agree people in Canmore are friendly and inclusive of all people. 85% agree people in Canmore feel accepted regardless of their background, identity, or lifestyle. And 57% agree Canmore needs to address racism and discrimination, and that is down from 68% in 2021. So I know that's a lot of information to take in this presentation. The survey covers a lot of different topics, and there's many different interesting findings and potential areas for action. But I just wanted to wrap up with kind of what I saw as 5 key takeaways from the survey. So overall, the results are positive, but lower than previous years. And this is a consistent theme throughout the survey, whether we're looking at perceptions of quality of life, satisfaction with council and administration, satisfaction with services, value for taxes. We're seeing that real trend around perceptions are positive, but less so than we've seen in the past. And I don't think it can necessarily be attributed to any one thing. There may be some lingering COVID-related impacts there as we're coming out of the pandemic. There's certainly some community-specific issues as well, and I will touch on those shortly. But the overall net result is the mood of a community is, like I said, positive, but less so than we've seen in the past surveys. And I've mentioned this kind of throughout the presentation as well, but I'll just highlight it again here, is that I don't think this is unique to Canmore. We're seeing this in a lot of the research that we're doing for different communities. It's a challenging time for a lot of people right now for many different reasons, and we're certainly picking up on that in the research that we're doing. Issues around housing and the cost of living are more pronounced this year. Both of these have moved up the public issue agenda. Housing is the #1 concern, mainly housing affordability. Cost of living is the main reason why residents feel why the quality of life has worsened. I don't think this is a surprise given the context of high inflation and rising interest rates, and just everything is more expensive these days for people everywhere, and so affordability is a challenge for many people these days. Growth and development remains a priority, but less so than 2021. So when we did the survey in 2021, growth and development was by far the #1 issue, mentioned high and above anything else that we saw. It's still a priority, but less so than 2021. So instead of being the most important issue, it's dropped to the second most important issue. There's also been perceptions of improved performance around kind of how the town is doing in this area. So we're seeing a satisfaction around land use and community planning. Attitudes towards growth management have improved. They're still lower, but they're improved from 2021. Perceptions of the town's overall communications are positive, but there is room to improve opportunities for engagement. So around 75% of residents say they rate the town's communications positively. 1/4 rate these poorly, so there is an opportunity there. But like I said, I think the bigger opportunity is around engagement. So that's making sure people have enough opportunities for engagement, and those are inclusive, so making sure they're being offered at different formats and times so that everyone has an opportunity to take part, and really being open and transparent around how residents' feedback is being used. So if there's, for example, other factors that might be influencing decisions, let people know that during the engagement, as well as when you share the results of the engagement, let people know kind of, thank you for your input, this is how your results were used, and this is kind of the other factors that played a role as well. Perceptions of availability and responsiveness have slipped this year. So this isn't around engagement, but I did think it was worth mentioning. This is where we're seeing lower scores this year as compared to 2021. So it is another area or potential area to look at making some changes. And then lastly, perceptions of environmental sustainability have improved. Residents do think the town is doing a better job of addressing the issue of human-wildlife interaction. And there's also improved satisfaction with the town's programs and services aimed at reducing climate change. So that's the presentation, and happy to entertain any questions. I don't know if you want me to keep my screen sharing or turn it off. Just let me know what works best for you.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. I think you can stop sharing your screen, and that way you can see us.
Yep.
Thank you, Ms. Naus, for your presentation. I'll open it up to my fellow council members for questions. Councillor Graham.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I'm wondering, how did we define a Canmore resident in this survey?
They're full-time or part-time residents of the town.
Full-time and part-time, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. That was a lot of information. Yeah, I'm still kind of digesting, to be totally honest with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Perfect. I do have a question. I didn't know you were going to do the takeaways, but other than what's mentioned in the takeaways, are there any other statistically significant changes you've seen in the results compared to 2021 or 2017?
Yeah. I mean, I think I touched on everything in the presentation where I pointed out significant changes. Some places there's more directional changes, but those aren't statistically significant, so I focused more on where we're seeing statistically significant changes. Yeah, and I don't have anything to add other than what I already included in the presentation.
Awesome. I do have a question for administration, and I think it's Ms. Dinaj. How do you plan on using these results in terms of moving forward in the work that we do to deliver services in the community?
One of the great ways that we use this information is to see, to give us a measure of how we're progressing towards helping council accomplish their goals. So we have our community monitoring report. We're working on our objectives and key results. And so this will be a key tool to help us check in and see how are we doing.
Perfect. Thank you. Any other questions from council? Councillor Graham?
One for administration again. We did the survey in 2017 and then 2021 and 2023. When can we expect the next one?
It is currently in the budget for 2025.
Thanks. Math was.
Okay. There were a lot of numbers presented to
There were a
us.
lot of numbers.
There's a lot of numbers. Awesome. All right, if that's everything, I'd like to thank Ms. Naus for coming and presenting to us, and Ms.
Thank you.
Dinaj as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we want to take a 5-minute, 10-minute break? This is where it's planned in the agenda, even though we're ahead of time. So let's come back at 2:18, and we'll be ready for the preliminary tax rate presentation. to your regularly scheduled program. And next up, we have Ms. Bizoise to present a staff report on the preliminary tax rates for 2023.
Thank you. So good afternoon, Deputy Mayor and Council. I'm here today to provide some Sorry. Oh, okay. I'm so excited. Just got started off. Okay, go now. All right, again. So I'm here today to provide some preliminary information on property taxes for 2023. Property assessment notices were mailed on February 13th, and now property owners have until April 24th, which is next Monday, to resolve any questions with the assessor or file a formal assessment appeal. Given that the information and the numbers in this briefing today, as well as my presentation, are the most recent available data that we have, there will be some minor adjustments between now and the final numbers that will come in the bylaw on the May 2nd council meeting. Just starting off with some basic definitions here. So property tax rates must be set through a bylaw, and that responsibility cannot be delegated. Each year, administration recommends municipal tax rates for various residential subclasses, non-residential class properties based upon the assessed property values, budgeted tax requirement, council-approved property tax policy, and other direction provided by council. So ahead of passing the annual property tax rate bylaw, this assessment information and tax rates are in front of you for your review and discussion. Starting with the budgeted tax requirements, council approved a budget of $68.3 million for 2023, which determines the amount of money needed to operate the municipality. From this budgeted total, if revenues from other sources, such as sales and rentals, permits and fines, are deducted, what's left is the amount of money the town needs to raise through property taxes. So for 2023, it is $32 million, as you can see on the slide. This total needs to be collected from taxes, can be further broken down into three components: the municipal taxes portion, the vital homes amount, and the estimate for supplementary taxes, which is collected later in the year. So there are some additional amounts that are needed to be collected through the property taxes each year. The municipal taxes and vital homes amounts are set through the budget process. Compared to 2022, municipal taxes increased 12.5% net of growth, and vital homes remain the same as 22 at $450,000. Next is the education taxes based on preliminary 2023 requisition that has been received. We see that the provincial education amount remains the same as previous years, but the town will see an overall increase of 3%, or $815,800 in 23, due to increase in assessment values, bringing the total education requisition to be collected for 23 at $24.8 million. So the seniors requisition amount comes from Bow Valley Regional Housing. There is a net increase of $55,600 for 23, and the amount to be collected is $1.54 million. Finally, the designated industrial property taxes requisition comes from municipal affairs, and the amount owed for 23 is $4,200. So here's what the tax dollar distribution will look like. So every dollar of property tax collected, 54 cents will go towards the town's municipal programs and services, including Vital Homes contribution. 42 cents will go to the province for the delivery of Alberta's education system, and the remaining 3 cents to Bow Valley Regional Housing for supportive living accommodation for seniors. Next is a comparison that we do with competitors and neighbors. So how does Canmore compare with our competitors? You have these graphs in the agenda package today as well, if they're not very clear on the screen here. So after we have the total amounts that we need to collect, we look at how to split that amount between residential and non-residential properties with the objective of equity and competitiveness in the distribution of the res and non-res tax share. The split of municipal taxes between res and non-res has been recommended to be kept at 65-35, which is consistent with prior years and in line with our competitors and neighbors. The property tax policy asks each year that we look at the split with respect to both our competitors and neighbors. So based on the 22 data in front of you on the graphs, you can see the competitor municipalities that are in the similar or similar market from an economic perspective. On the left is the assessment share, and on the right is the tax share and their splits. Canmore is the dark green bar on each of those sites, and you can see the average assessment share is 83 res and 17 non-res. In Canmore, we are at 85-15. Last year, the average was 82-18, Canmore being at 84-16, so it's pretty close. For the tax share, the average of our competitors is at 67-33, which supports maintaining a historic split at 65 res, 35 non-res. This ratio was the same as prior year. And how do we compare against our neighbors? The average split of the assessment of our neighbors is 79-21. Again, we are at 85-15. The average split of taxes with our neighbors is at 69-31 versus our 65-35. So overall, like prior years, Canmore is just sitting roughly kind of towards the middle of the average of our competitors and neighbors. So therefore, keeping the tax split at 65 and 35 is recommended. Moving into assessment. So once we have those splits, the next step is to divide those split portions based on the assessed values. So the assessment needs to comply with the standard of assessment regulation that's established in the MGA. The audit branch of Alberta Municipal Affairs monitors assessments to confirm assessors are applied legislation appropriately, and the assessments are prepared using the same value standards for all properties, and the subsequent assessments are fair and equitable. Something to note here, the properties are assessed and subsequently taxed based on economic conditions on July 1st, and their condition as of December 31st, 2022 of last year. So as we saw last year, and even in the recent trends, real estate demand in Canmore remains strong throughout the market as buyers have become accustomed to the higher lending levels. We're seeing, even though recreational properties are being forecasted to see a decline, but Alberta, and specifically Canmore, is an exception. It draws a lot of attention, interest from several buyer segments from all over Canada. Here is the assessment information in aggregate, which totals by classification. So the total taxable assessment base for 2023 is 10.68 billion, which is an increase of 2 billion, or 22.6% year over year. This is composed of two pieces. First is the real growth, that is the assessed value of new properties that did not previously exist. And the second component is the market growth, or inflation. It's the net increase in the assessed value of existing properties. They equate to, as you can see on the slide at the bottom, 127.67 million and 1.84 billion, respectively, totaling 2 billion increase in taxable assessment growth year over year. Like always, each year, owners of tourist home properties who are not renting their property have the option of completing a statutory declaration, which if they're using it for personal use, in accordance with our property tax policy. So you see the fluctuations year over year in these two tourist home classifications. It depends on which properties file that declaration in any given year. Some references for the assessment data. This is the changes in average assessed values from 22 into 23 for each of the property classifications on the slide. It is important to note that an average is not necessarily the indicative of any individual specific property or specific tax burden. Properties with assessment changes below or above average will see lower or higher taxes increase or decreases. I have also included a median assessment comparison by residential classification, by their classification and their property type. This is only for residential, because on the non-res side, it's significant amount of variation between those non-res properties, which makes median values less meaningful as a reference point. So how are the mill rates calculated? So starting with the amounts to collect through our budget process and the requisition received, and then the res, non-res splits being determined. Each split is then divided based on assessed values in those classifications to determine the rates. The mill rate is the dollar value of taxes per $1,000 of assessed value. So the property tax rate bylaw will set out the different rates for the different classes of properties. As a reminder, not all properties pay all the taxes, as there are different combinations of taxes depending on the nature of the property. So these are the preliminary mill rates for 2023. Again, likely to change slightly between now and once April 24th with the final deadline, and I'll bring the final rates at the May 2nd council meeting. And as per MGA, municipalities are to conform to a non-res to res mill rate ratio of no more than 5:1. And as you can see, we are at 3.28:1. So how does that compare to our competitors and neighbors? To give us a bit of sense of scale of who we are comparing against ourselves to, the number of dwellings of each of our competitors is on the slide. On the right, we have the residential tax per dwelling. As you can see, the average for our competitors is $1,808, and we are slightly higher than that at $1,960, but kind of in the middle of the spread there on the right side on the dark green bar. And then same thing for the neighbors. Left is a sense of our neighbors by the classifications, and on the right is the residential tax per dwelling. The average is, again, it's at $1,992, and we are at $1,960, almost there. So we're kind of, again, sitting between our competitors and neighbors, roughly in the middle of these data ranges, based on our policies and proposed split. Lastly, before I wrap up, I just have some stats on the appeals, and the number of formal appeals received as of today is 18, all of which are residential properties. One has been withdrawn, so there are 17 active files. Not all of these necessarily will go to the Assessment Review Board, as some will be resolved between now and when the hearings are scheduled. And just for perspective, 2022, 54 appeals were received, of which 45 were resolved prior to the hearings. Our assessors have been successful in defending most of the appeal assessment values and that have been taken to the board in the prior years. And I'll bring forward the final appeal numbers in the May 2nd report as well. So this concludes my presentation. Have any questions, I'm here. If there's any scenarios you'd like to see modeled, we could bring them back. And then the final rates come to the May 2nd council meeting. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Ms. Biswas, for your presentation. I will open it up to questions from council. Councillor Hillstadt.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. With regard to the education tax, we didn't really go over that much, but that does make up our tax bill total for the town. A lot of people just assume that the big number is all municipal, but really it's a breakdown of municipal education and the seniors requisition. I just have a quick, do we have our comparators numbers on how much they pay for education tax? Just out of curiosity, I'd love to know what our neighbors, and just again how we do it with the municipal taxes. If we had a breakdown of the education tax, I feel like we're going to be a little higher up than most other towns and cities, almost.
Yeah, through the chair, yes, we do have that information, and I can circulate it to all of you.
Thank you.
I would just add that the education tax is based on assessed value, as Ms. Biswas spoke to in her presentation, and so that really does, our assessed value is much higher than our neighbors and competitors, so to your point, that's why it's higher.
I actually was going to ask if we could see our comparators and our neighbors' total assessed value, total assessments. Like, ours is 10 point something billion, but where is everyone else at? I thought that would be a good number to know. I don't know if you have that.
No. 2022 is
Yeah.
available, not 23 for sure, yes.
Yeah,
I
no.
can-
Yeah.
Yeah, I can
Alright,
probably bring that back, yes.
Councillor Graham.
Thank you, Ms. Biswa. You mentioned that there are some properties that are not, that don't get taxed. And that is through the MGA, is that correct? That is not a town of Canmore policy.
Through the chair, that's correct, those are exempt properties, yes.
We have no control over that whatsoever.
There are sorry.
No, go ahead.
Apologies. I know that there are nonprofits and organizations in the community that can request to have their municipal taxes waived, just municipal, and we do that. For example, the Canmore Golf and Curling Club. A portion.
Through the
so-
copter, yeah.
But we can't waive provincial taxes.
I appreciate
Through
the
the copter,
clarification.
yes.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Ma?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, and thank you, Ms. Biswa. I was taking a look here in your presentation, and it said there's real growth for the last year. We saw about 85 million was residential, and 42 million, so about 50% was non-residential. How's that compared to prior years? I'm trying to understand, is this sort of ratio moving forward, something that's new, or?
The real growth through this year, the real growth is pretty much comparable. It's the inflation that was really high this year. So the
Okay.
1.84 billion number,
Right.
that really was high.
Okay, great, thank you.
But I can
this-
bring back the
and-
exact numbers too.
Okay, and the
if you'd like to
split
see.
within the real growth between residential and non-residential, is that pretty typical for what
Pretty
we saw
typical,
this year? Okay,
yes.
thank you.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm okay.
You're okay? Okay, sorry. You were still on the docket there. Okay. I had a couple questions. The market growth of 1.84 billion. Over the last 10 years, how would that rank in terms of increases to market growth? Is this a abnormally large jump in market growth? And I know that this does not represent a market assessment. It's a one-time thing. But year over year, did what we see in the growth in our assessments from market changes, is it larger than in previous years?
It definitely is.
Yeah, it's a
Deputy
big-
Mayor. This has been the highest, I think, that I've seen. But I can get back like 10 years worth of data. I've not gone back that many years, but over the last couple of years, for sure, this has been the highest.
Yes. And then I'd already asked about the total assessments for other community, or for our neighboring and competitors. I'm just wondering if any other communities that we compare ourselves to have $10+ billion in assessment, or where that is. And then, Kelowna, yeah. And then I had a weird question. And this is because I, as a rookie to the process, as a newly elected councillor, recently, and it's further information about this is in the reports from staff, but we received $800,000 additional funding for transit this year. But I think that if we had known when we were doing the budget that we had that $800,000, we might have made different decisions that would affect the tax rate. Would getting that, knowing that we have that money now, would it be would you recommend reconsidering our tax rates? Or are they, because they're not a recurring funding source, would that mean that it's not really advisable to reconsider something like our tax rates at this time?
I would consider not changing the tax rate, definitely, at this point, Deputy Mayor. This is a one-time funding grant received, and just to keep our taxes in a level and keep it stabilized year over year, we should stick to the budgeted approved tax increase.
Yeah. It was like, yay, we got more money. And I was like, but can we use this to lower taxes? No. Awesome, thank you. Any other questions from council? No, we're good. Thank you, Ms. Biswas.
Thank you.
All right, we're moving into E, Councillor Updates. If anyone has a question for Mayor Krausert, he's not here to answer. So we can just skip his section. Are there any questions on my update, Councillor? Councillor Ma.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I was just reading with great interest the part on the Canmore Museum here, and there's approved upgrades to security and surveillance systems to protect important artworks on display. That sounds super prudent to me. Have there been past incidents that have been driven this, or is this being proactive?
This is more proactive because of the program change and infrastructure change in the gallery space. So instead of having a 12 months of the year permanent one exhibit, what they want to do is change it to having part of the space dedicated to a permanent coal exhibit, because that's really a big part of our heritage, but then having a temporary gallery space where different shows can come in. And similar to what the White Museum does with their main gallery. But because of the value of some of the works, even in our first exhibit that's coming up, including like A.Y. Jackson, who was a member of the Group of Seven, we needed to upgrade the security to meet insurance and industry standards for museums.
Okay.
So there was a good debate, I think, at the board level around, what level of security we should be installing. But I think that from a risk management perspective, it was really prudent to follow the recommendations.
Great. I'm looking forward to seeing what gets curated over the next year. Thank you.
I would expect an opening, like a grand opening. There will be an event, y'all invited.
Yeah.
It's going to be good.
Excellent. Thank you.
Any other questions for me? Next is Councillor Graham. All right. Councillor Hillstadt. Councillor Ma. Councillor Mera. I have one for Councillor Mera. In the back of the agenda for Bow Valley Regional Housing, there is the report that you include. For the Bow River Seniors Lodge, in terms of occupancy and wait list, page 68. Oh, wait, no. I'm totally using a different numbered agenda than you.
Page 45-ish, guys?
Yeah.
44? 544.
Yeah. Do those numbers include the new?
No, it's just the Bow River Seniors Lodge, it's not the DSL.
Oh, okay, so the DSL building would have a different name? Oh,
Sorry.
there's your mic. There we go. We'll try that again.
No, there is no occupancy list right now for that. It's because everything's just moving in. It's a whole transitional piece. I'm assuming that there will be an update from our coordinator. But right now, this is just the seniors lodge itself.
Awesome. And the grand opening is next week?
It is no. April 27th, I believe it is, isn't it?
That would be next week. I'm looking forward to it.
27th, yes.
Awesome. Okay. So, Councillor McCallum. Any questions for Councillor McCallum's report? Oh.
Hit my button.
I've dropped the ball on the microphones. Councillor Hillstadt.
Thank you. It's exciting to see that Rome Transit has signed a contract to purchase a 5-bedroom staff accommodation unit. I'm just curious, is it in Canmore or Banff?
It's in the beautiful neighborhood of Teepee Town in Canmore.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That was it.
Okay. Perfect. All right, I'm scrolling through my agenda. I have a paper one right here. All right, administrative updates. Okay. Getting there. I honestly thought the iPad would make my life way more easier, but in this moment right now, it's not. Okay, administrative updates, the CAO's office. Any questions for administration? Yeah, what? All right. Councillor Ma.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. This is a question for General Manager Corporate Services. It's kind of a bummer that the Government of Canada is insisting we do that retroactive pay for the RCMP. And I see here we're contemplating like just paying the invoice outright. What sort of terms of payment were they offering for the extended 2 years?
Is it on?
There it is.
There
No,
we go.
I got it. There weren't really terms. I think they're still figuring that out. They had offered we could pay the invoice in one-time payment as received or spread a payment over a couple of years. But where we had accrued that amount, it doesn't make sense for us to carry it over again into another year. There has been a bit of back and forth since this report was written, so we may have another update moving forward. But we have accrued that amount, and we think it's prudent to pay the invoice by the end of the year, I would say at the latest, yeah.
Okay, so it wasn't like we'll give you 2 years interest-free to pay it
No.
back sort of thing? No.
Not really, no.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Ms. Rogers? Any other questions under CAO's office? All right, we're moving on to municipal services, community social development, recreation services, fire rescue, protective services, economic development. Oh. Councillor Graham?
I'm not sure where this question might land, so I'm just going to ask it now. I've got a puppy, and we walk around the dog parks fairly often, and there's been some conversations about the moving of some garbage bins for feces collections. Specifically, the one on Bow Valley Trail. I wonder if we can get an update on that. We've moved one garbage bin from the one entrance, so that, and both down at the, I guess that would be the south entrance. And there's some feedback from the community that's
Specifically the heliport dog
yes.
park? Okay.
Yeah, the heliport dog park. Yeah, just looking for some why that happened and if there's opportunities for other changes.
I'm not sure why that happened. I can check in with Parks and get back to you. And I think I know if the community has feedback around location of the waste bins or other infrastructure in parks, they can always email publicworks@canmore.ca with a question or a request, and it'll be considered by staff. But I'll look into the specifics around this waste container.
Beautiful. I'll pass that along next time I'm walking around there.
Great, thanks.
Appreciate that.
Councillor McCallum?
Thank you. I think we might have passed it. Hold on. ECDEV. Happy Pad. which I have seen operate in Nelson, British Columbia, and I'm wondering if we have any, I know it's early because it is only the 18th of April, and this was launched in early April, but any feedback or anything like that?
There we go.
Thank you. The website, the Happy Pad has been launched, but we actually haven't started officially marketing it yet. We're just waiting to work with Happy Pad to get some of those materials. And so marketing, as soon as it's available and ready, that will start.
Awesome.
So it's a little too early for feedback, but in the next month or two, we hope to have some.
Awesome. Thanks very much.
I was recently speaking with someone who asked the very question of like, how do I rent my room out to support the local economy? And I was like, well, we have a solution for you. It's coming. It's called Happy Pad. So, perfect. I think Corporate Services. Councillor Ma.
Thank you. I see we've got a new company that's going to do our Canmore's new website, Loop. And I was curious with regards to some other community engagement and messaging tools. Is there a status update for our emergency text messaging? Okay.
I'll have to get an update from you. It's actually being led by Municipal Enforcement Protective Services area, who has emergency management within their branch. So I can get an update from Ms. Miller, and then we can provide that.
Right. Yeah, thank you. I was trying to figure out if it's under like the emergency side or the communication piece, because they kind of come together.
They're certainly partnering on that, but the lead is emergency management.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. Thank you.
all right. Corporate municipal infrastructure. Councillor Mera.
Thank you. I'm not sure where exactly to insert this. I know it's under this purview. Over the last few months, winter months, I've been monitoring both another community and our community on our public benches, private and public. I'm just wondering where both communities are promoting vibrancy and walking all seasons of the year. I'm just wondering whose responsibility it is through the communities to uncover the benches, because I noticed quite a few are covered in snow and not just after a specific snow event. So I'm just curious whose responsibility it is to keep them clear, or if there is a responsibility during the winter.
That's a really great question. For the most part, our snow and ice removal program is focused on, as you know, roadways and pathways and sidewalks, and at bus stops as well, right? Because it's really focused on mobility and people being able to move around safely. In that context, I don't know that benches have been considered, but I will certainly take that back to my team. I think it's a great point.
And maybe this is something, if I could just continue, maybe something we can partner with some of the businesses that also have maybe public infrastructure in front of them that, I mean, this would be an asset to them to also chip in and clear them off also.
Absolutely. I think we have really good relationships with a number of businesses in, well, the business community in downtown and elsewhere, so I absolutely think that's a great idea.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Councillor Hillstad.
Thank you. So this is about the crack that was observed at the water slide at EP. Just curious if we have a timeline yet on when that repair might begin or be completed, because I know it's early days still with, got the structural engineer in there to take a look at it, and we're waiting on that report. So I'm just curious on where that stands, because my kids want the slide back.
Fair enough. I'm just trying to, I'm going to scroll through because I know, I think there's been some events. Yeah, it's next page. Sorry, it's a big department. Okay, yeah, so we did some, we brought in consulting engineers to take a look at the cracks. Since that time, we've noticed that there's some additional cracking in the platform that we've observed, so we're working with the consulting engineer on what the best solution will be, and we've also installed some hoarding to prevent anything from falling down onto the surface below or damaging the slide. So we don't have an estimate to reopening the slide at this point, because we're still kind of in the midst of
Discovery.
yeah, determining the extent of the repairs required.
Thank you.
Back to Councillor Ma's question, I just did receive an update electronically. We have just selected a provider. They are called Voyant Alert, and it's the same emergency messaging provider that Banff and the MD are using, so that provides some regional communication opportunities. So we're in early stages. We'll be getting some staff training in the next few weeks, and then we'll be launching marketing. We're working with them for some marketing collateral and materials. So we're on the way.
Perfect, thank you. Oh, did you have another one? Okay, I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
Okay, we're going to go Councillor Ma and then Councillor McCallum.
Awesome, thank you. Thanks for the update with the Voyant app, and so I'm looking forward to that rollout. Sounds like we'll be able to see that before the summer, fingers crossed. Question here, I'm noticing how CP Rail has notified us, the town, that the crossing at Railway Avenue Bow Valley Trail is going to need some work. And it says here it's going to take several days, possibly in June, and require a full closure of Railway Avenue. What does the extent of full closure mean? Like how far down Railway, like both sides at the same time? Like, this is a big one to me.
Yeah, so this is a challenge in working around some of the repair work and rehabilitation work that CP Rail has to do. We don't really know the extent of the works required until they begin them, and we don't know what their start date is usually until it's only a few days out. So I can't give you an answer to that question because we just don't know the extent of the work.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor McCallum?
Thank you. I noticed that the province of Alberta has decided to adopt Tier 1 of the National Building Code, which, as you pointed out, is the lowest standard of the 5 tiers for energy efficiency. Great. My question is when will this kick in? When is the date that this is meant to take effect?
I can't recall off the top of my head. I'm just pulling up the notice. Yeah, I'm not sure yet. I'll have to follow up with my staff.
No worries. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Always happy to underachieve.
Councillor Graham?
I'd actually like a follow-up on Councillor McCallum's question. Is there any opportunity for municipalities to opt into a higher?
We would have really appreciated that opportunity, but no. The province has set the tier, and that's what it is across all of Alberta.
If you were to recommend a way to lobby the provincial government for a change such as that, what would you recommend?
I would recommend that council members or through the mayor could take that up with the province. We had staff from the Office of Sustainability involved in working through the province on this, and certainly we've been clear all along that our desire would be for placement on a higher tier, or at least having municipalities have the opportunity to choose which tier they want to be at, similar to BC. Unfortunately, that's just not the decision that was made.
How very disappointing. Thank you.
Yes, I would agree.
One venue for Councillor Graham and McCallum that I was considering is potentially putting forward a resolution for the Alberta Municipalities Convention to get that organization to lobby the province to provide municipalities with the option to take a higher tier, and those resolutions are due in May. So, but it has to pass on the floor there, and I don't think that other municipalities might not have the same perspective that we do about achieving a higher level.
Well, I would agree with you, but the option, we give them the option to take a higher level, doesn't force them to do anything more or less than they would already. I would encourage this council to suggest a resolution at Alberta Munis, and I would support such a motion.
Councillor McCallum?
Thank you. Well, the toolkit is on the AlbUni's website, and you're welcome to fill that out, Councillor Graham. I just wanted to give a shout out to admin for that refreshed housing needs assessment as required by the Alberta government. I can see that it was a labor of love and kind of like pounding a square peg in a round hole, because they are looking for certain answers in a certain way, and we're not that certain community, but it's not as fulsome as the big one that BVRH does, but it is very pointed, and in terms of a few pages of important data, this is it. So shout out, thank you.
Thank you for that, and I would also want to recognize both BVRH and CCH, who were instrumental in helping us pull that data together. The other thing I wanted to say, so I found the date reference. It's in the letter, not in the notice for the building code, and they expect it to come into force and apply to construction activities for spring 2024.
All right. I had a question around the recycling depot repairs, and actually a similar question that dates back to the RCMP back pay. Would these changes come forward to, like, does council have to amend its budget in order for these things to be changed?
For the Waste Management Center, we're not sure yet. There is an amount that's really around repairs and maintenance in the operating budget, so we won't really know until we start to do the work, or we start to get into the work, whether or not it can be accommodated in the operating budget or not. So I don't have an answer at this point.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Lots
I'm
of button
battling
hitting.
you.
And on the RCMP back pay, it does not. We have been accruing this amount, or accruing an amount every year based on predictions, knowing that this might come. So it's already in our financials, and we're able to just pay it. If we accrue it, it maybe would have come forward as a contribution to reserve. If it wasn't accrued, yeah, then it would have come with your year-end financials, but there's no budget amendment required, and if we pay the invoice, there's nothing needed because we have the money. So,
Is that the tax stabilization reserve?
that is where we would have put it, I believe. If we didn't need to pay the bill, if the federal government had paid it, then our recommendation would have been that money go back into tax stabilization. But we have been, as part of our annual financial accounting, putting us an amount in based on predictions every year since for the last few years. I don't want to say the exact year because I'm not sure. And that's been part of our audited financials, so it's all already there and accounted for. So there won't be any action needed from council, is the short answer.
All right, perfect. Thank you. All right. Oh, do you still, you're good? Okay. There is a ghost in this machine, and it's haunting me. Okay, so we're through infrastructure. Oh, here's this. Okay. Council resolution action list. Any questions around that item? Marga. Correspondence. All right. And we have nothing in camera. So unless anyone on council is reaching for their button, I'm going to make a motion to adjourn. All in favor?